Thank you all so much for having me. I am Sarah Stamper, the Chief Research Officer of Murmuration, and today I'm really excited to share the sneak peek of the findings from the report, The Future of Representation, a new national study from Murmuration and our friends at Represent Women. This project was really examining how Americans think about women's leadership, elections, representation, and the future of democracy. You all obviously are familiar with Represent Women, but if you aren't familiar with Murmuration, we are a nonprofit who organizes a network of community-focused organizations and partners, and we equip them with data, research, tools, and services that help them better understand and engage in the communities that they serve. A central part of our work and my favorite part of my job is all of our research initiatives that involve listening to America at scale. And so since we launched Civic Pulse in 2024, we have talked to more than 350,000 people about their lives, what they believe, how they experience civic and community life. And we're talking to at least 1,000 people new every day. Next. So this particular project and the results that you'll see are based on the views and opinions and perspectives of 5,000 Americans that we talked to in early June, focused on questions about their views on women's leadership and representation. We are particularly interested in the future about looking at how these attitudes vary across communities, continuing to understand perspectives of women leaders, and also understanding which reform messages are effective at connecting women's representation to the broader concerns about representativeness, accountability, and trust. But what we wanted to share with you right now is the first foundational national view of what we're learning so far. The too long didn't read is this. Americans are frustrated with the way that politics currently works, but that frustration does not necessarily mean that we're rejecting democracy. And so we find continued engagement with democratic ideals and that many people believe the system is flawed, but that it's still capable of change and being improved. To start with, the dissatisfaction is substantial. This is a waffle chart, and so you can see if you look at the various dots that are labeled very dissatisfied and somewhat dissatisfied, we find that nearly 68% of Americans are dissatisfied with the way that elections and politics work today. That includes 43% who are very dissatisfied, and only 28% here on the other side of the chart are describing themselves as satisfied. So there is no question that the status quo is failing to meet the expectations of most Americans. What this dissatisfaction doesn't tell us alone is whether people have given up or whether they want something better. And so the intensity here is what we're focused on because it is going to explain findings later that show the public's openness to significant reform. When we look across political parties, perhaps not surprisingly, the story becomes more complicated than just general cynicism. A majority of Americans still believe that elections give citizens a meaningful say in how the country is governed. Nearly two-thirds believe that the rules determining who runs and who wins can be changed to make elections fairer. And while satisfaction here with politics varies by party, the belief that reform is possible is shared much more broadly. And so while Republicans and Democrats are arriving at a conclusion for somewhat different reasons, there is meaningful convergence on the idea that the system can be improved. And so we ask, Americans are sort of frequently told that polarization is one of the defining challenges that are facing democracy right now. And one of the things that we love to do in our survey and polling work is to give people these big, huge open-ended boxes where they can tell us anything. They can write 3 words, they can write 3 paragraphs. And so when we ask people, what do you think the biggest problem is? Ideological conflict isn't what pops up first. What we hear about is corruption. We hear about the influence of special interests. We hear about media bias and a lack of trustworthy news. And only 9% of responses end up being coded to something that expresses political division. And so the public's dominant concern is not that Americans disagree, it is that power is concentrated, unaccountable, or serving interests other than those of ordinary people. And that frustration is translating into a really clear appetite for change. Nearly 6 in 10 Americans say the country needs major change to the way that elections and representation work. And 59% say that improving representation and fairness is more important, in fact, than preserving stability and trust in existing institutions. What you see plotted here are voters and non-voters based on the 2024 election. And in many cases, you see that the reform is being demanded by people who continue to invest and participate in democracy. So we find voters were more likely than non-voters to strongly believe that the election rules can be changed to make the system fair. And again, when we give people an open box to say what needs to change, the responses were really wide ranging, but the most common responses ended up being described as changing the voting rules and integrity, reforming electoral college, solving corruption and having better accountability, better representation, and then finally sort of getting money out of politics. And so what stands out are not any of these specific findings, it's how often people connected these concerns. They didn't necessarily see campaign financing, gerrymandering, voter access, party control, and representation as separate problems. They saw them as interconnected parts of a system that feels insufficiently representative and insufficiently accountable. So just as a sort of smattering to randomly pulled quotes here to illustrate that people may disagree sharply about the specific problem, but that they still share the belief that the system needs to work better. And so here you have a Democratic respondent who's arguing that the popular vote should determine the outcomes because people's voices should be heard over the voice of the Electoral College. And you have a Republican respondent who's emphasizing consistent voting methods and public trust in the election process. So those are absolutely different reform priorities, but they reflect a shared concern with legitimacy, whether elections are accurately and incredibly representing the public. This is the most important slide that I'm going to show you. And this is the most important sentence that I believe I'm going to say, which is people want more choice, they want more representation, and they want less party control. What that really means is that they're looking for independence and they're looking for more perspective. And so these are trade-offs. When we ask people, you have the choice of saying voters have more flexibility to vote for their preferred candidate, or that you want political parties to have more control over the candidates on the ballot. And so what you see is that the darker bars, all of which sort of go this way, mean that those are the sort of stronger agreed statements across the folks that we talked to. And so what you see here is 78% prioritize giving voters greater flexibility to support their preferred candidate over giving parties more control over the ballot. 73% prefer leaders who make decisions based on issues and circumstances rather than reliably following a party agenda. 66% say candidates' views and experiences matter more than the political party that they represent. And finally, 62% prioritize bringing in new perspectives to the government over extensive prior experience working within the government. And so if you put all of that together, what I think these findings suggest is that Americans are looking for leaders who feel accountable to communities rather than to primarily political institutions. Oh, we can go to the next slide. Oh, we did go to the next slide. Sorry. My brain's lagging. And so I want to talk about the role that women's representation plays in this desire for more representation and the way that it is viewed as being beneficial for democracy. And so, um, absolutely, there's broader desire for new voices that provide the context for understanding attitudes towards women's representation. So, 58% believe that male and female political leaders have meaningfully different leadership styles. Nearly half are saying that increasing the number of women in elected positions is important. That is compared to just 21%, so two times, who say it is unimportant. And the public is saying that they don't view men and women's leadership as interchangeable. Many Americans believe that lived experience shapes the priorities, the perspectives, and the decision making. So again, when we ask people, well, what do you think would happen if more women were elected? Respondents most often pointed towards representation and responsiveness. So you can see the variety of things that people said. 39% believe different issues would receive more attention. People feel that more people would be represented, that it would set a positive example for future generations, and that the government itself would better reflect the population. And so, while people expect changes in leadership style, policy priorities, and how political leaders work together, I think is a really strong sign. And we have only 20% of people who think that electing more women wouldn't make a difference. And this is really important because it means the argument is not merely symbolic, right? Many people expect that broader representation can affect how government actually operates. In general, Americans see women as qualified and capable leaders. There is less agreement about then why women remain underrepresented, and we're highlighting the partisan differences here because those are sort of substantial. So the majority of Democrats are identifying structural barriers. Republicans are much more likely to attribute the gap to women being less likely to run or to a perceived lack of candidates. And so, while on the last slide we sort of showed broader agreement that women can lead effectively and lead differently in ways that provide more representative, more responsiveness, and sort of more alignment with many American views, there is less agreement about what is in fact preventing that parity. And so we followed up on this idea of voter preference, and we asked folks whether they believed their community and the country was ready to elect women to particular levels of government. And so what you see here along the top are the community responses, and along the bottom are the country's responses. And so the majority believe that the country is ready and communities are ready to elect women as state legislators, as mayors, as county executives, and as government. The presidency remains a notable exception. Only 1/3 believe that their own community or the country as a whole is ready to elect a woman as president, which is posing a uniquely difficult barrier. To end on not a sad note, but a brighter note, younger adults are most likely to see increasing women's representation as important, and they are nearly twice as likely as older adults to preferred female candidates when all else is equal. So they are, in fact, among the strongest supporters of changes to elections and changes to representation, with 64% of young Americans saying that bringing in new perspectives to government matters the most. And so, excitingly, as the younger generation becomes the larger share of both the electorate and also the leadership pipeline, these expectations will increasingly shape political life. We won't just show you data. We will tell you what we think the implications of that data are. And so we really see five main implications for reformers, for advocates, and for political leaders. First and foremost is to lead with representation, not demographics. Americans respond well to arguments about responsiveness, accountability, and whether government reflects the people that it serves. Second is to recognize the public's appetite for independent leadership. Voters consistently prefer judgment and experience over party loyalty. Third is to focus on systems, not just candidates. People often attribute underrepresentation to the structures that determine who runs, who wins, and who governs. So talking about systems is important. Fourth, invest in that next generation of leadership. Younger Americans are especially open to new forms of representation and reform. And finally, yes, there is some cynicism, but there is also a lot of hope. And so building reform around hope rather than that cynicism, because Americans have not abandoned the belief that democracy can work better, we think is also really critical. And finally, as I mentioned, while this study gives us a strong foundation, we are so thrilled to be continuing our work with Represent Women in order to build on what we have learned, to continue to understand and look at attitudes towards women's leadership, electoral reform, and representation, and how that varies by geography, by community type, by local political context. To also then continue to look at voter preferences on the qualities and leadership styles of women in politics. And finally, to test messages to identify the most effective ways to connect women's representation to concerns about the responsiveness, accountability, fairness, and trust in government. So I'll close with this. Americans are not giving up on representation. They are asking whether the institutions around them are still capable of providing it. And I think the data shows that representation is about more than who holds office. It's about whether people can see their experiences, communities, and priorities reflected in public life. And so the challenge is not convincing Americans that democracy matters. It's in demonstrating that democracy can feel more representative, more responsive, and more accountable than it does today. And so I will leave it at that. And hopefully some folks have ideas, questions, things that they're wondering about, and we can have a little bit of a conversation.
Thank you so much,
Of
Sarah, for
course.
that great presentation and for all of you being on this call. And I think that resonates so deeply that what we have thought to be true. It's always nice, I will say, when you have a hunch and then it's confirmed by a really large sample of voters and like, okay, good, we're on the right track. I feel so I appreciate that. And I do think it's not something that everybody in this ecosystem, I think, appreciates the extent to which if we don't see ourselves in the people who are making the decisions, it's awfully hard to feel like that decision-making body should continue to have our respect and our engagement. And I think really this data gets to the heart at so much we do, and I think very importantly suggests a way forward on some of the strategies that we grapple with all the time. Like what are the kinds of voting systems that voters want? Like we can't just say, or we should not say, oh, we've got this great idea. We can't, it's a simulation. We're gonna try to see if it can work in America. We really have to, I think, have what we are doing be grounded in meeting the needs of Americans where they are, where we are right now. And I feel like some of the questions around what voters want. Of course, voters want power to select candidates who represent them in every way. It determines everything about our lives is determined by the people who are making decisions on policy and so forth. So anyway, I'm very grateful, but I'm also very interested to hear what questions people have, and I'm so impressed with the contingent of people we have from such a interesting group of organizations on this call. So I hope you'll raise your hand, ask Sarah a question live, put a question in the chat, follow up with us with questions. And I think we're also going to have a survey that we'll drop at the end of the call for anybody who has additional questions, thoughts. But the floor is open. Sarah, did you find these results surprising in any way, or do they nest in data that you've gotten from other kinds of polling? I know you do so much that's valuable to the field.
Yeah, no, great question, Cynthia. So as I've mentioned, right, we've asked any number of questions to more than 350,000 Americans in the last couple of years, and I think that these findings were really resonant in what is bubbling up, whether we are asking about affordability and the economic conditions that people are living in, where in general we even if you're just like, hey, like, are you thinking about putting food on your table? It very quickly ends up with, and the people making decisions don't know anything about this because like they're not struggling to buy bananas. And uh other topics that we've done deep dives in, health, housing, like we just finished collecting some new data on AI and the possible impact that that's going to have on how people think about elections and campaigns and misinformation. And all of this very quickly, when you talk with people about their experiences in their lives, transition into a deep concern that the folks who are, quote, at the table don't actually understand or have any view on how this is impacting folks sort of day in, day out in community. Is that a hand? Are those hands?
I think Kathy may have had her hand up first, though we don't want to prioritize just Kathy. We want to hear from Marianne also.
Um, wow, that was fast and furious. Lots to take in and absorb. I couldn't write fast enough, and I'm happy
Oh,
that
we will share everything. So sorry,
oh,
we should have told you you didn't have to scribble,
yeah,
but
no, but
sorry
it
about
helps
that.
me.
Yeah.
I'm a kinesthetic learner, so I need to do that. Um, and I feel hopeful now, which is a rare emotion for me to have in the last 18 months. Um, uh, and and it's sort of out of my bubble of lovely true blue DC. So this is good. But I still fear that despite this, the deck is not stacked in our favor. We're 9 months away from midterms. And I know, you know, many of us are speaking from 501(c)(3) megaphone. Um, so I understand that this can be awkward, but um, despite the hope, I am still worried. And I'm curious if the survey sort of addresses the reforms that have made some of these ideas merely aspirational and not uh, really implementable. It's not a real word, but
Can you rephrase or say a little bit more about the actual question about what the survey says?
so it's
I didn't
the
connect the dots on my side.
yeah, because it's still not clear in my head either. I worry
Okay.
that um, that really the idea of electing more women, that the view of that people will really vote this way, that their response to the questions is more aspirational than when they go into the old-fashioned voting booth and pull that lever, that it will really um, come to fruition.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for the additional words. One of the things that has been most interesting to me is a question that we didn't ask in this particular poll, but that we call our kitchen table question, which is to just ask people, what'd you talk about around your kitchen table last night? And we follow that later in the same script with, and the last time you voted, what were you thinking about in the voting booth? And so we can look for any individual person. What are they actually talking about as the daily concern? And then what are they thinking about when they vote? And the four things that come up across political party, this was one where I had to have my team check this data like 20 times before I believed it, because we made a GIF showing the flow. And as it was like scrolling through party by party by party, I was squinting so hard and couldn't see a difference. And I was like, this can't be real. And in fact, what we found across political party, and I'm happy to put a link to this particular analysis in the chat when I'm done waving my hands, um, was the four things that come up in both conditions for all folks is money, health, rights, and well, now I'm going to embarrass myself and forget the last one. Money, hope, rights. Uh, uh, I'll get back to you on the fourth most important thing. Um, but they're consistent. And so that does give me a little bit of optimism, that when people are talking with us about their concerns, about what they're talking about what they want to see happen, that it is reflected in then what is top of mind when they do get into that voting booth. It's also one of the reasons why we did not explicitly ask people, would you vote for a woman in these levels? Because there's a lot of social desirability to be like, oh, I'm not right? Like, yes, of course I would. And so, what the evidence suggests is that when you ask people to then talk about their community, they sort of project their own view and answer onto that in a more accurate way than if they were reporting about themselves. And so, again, I think that that's pretty indicative of where we would expect individuals to end up with in terms of voting for women into those particular offices.
If I can, if that's okay. I can't believe I can't find the reaction. I'm a Teams person all the time. So I think it's really interesting some of this analysis, how it shows that people want these independent candidates, where we obviously are in a two-party system with some places where we're trying to be more than a multi-party two-party system, but that parties are not going away. And how do we really think about what needs to shift on the perception? And I don't think it's top down, I think it's bottom up of these parties. A lot of the work that I did in my community in the Hudson Valley, which was one of the swing districts that happened in 2016, and what we did to swing that and then change basically flip elections up and down the ballot was really at the party level. And it was like, how do we shift those perceptions of people understanding that the Democratic Party in my local town is not the National Democratic Party and that there's a big difference? I will say we did a ton of work. I'm very proud of the way that we structured and thought about the party, put a woman in power in the party. And that was done behind closed doors. I was facilitating women, like, how do we take over the party? And we did it. And I think that's an important piece of people feeling like they have more power and being involved in that space. We then hit it when we got up to the state level. That's where we hit, like, there's not a lot of change that can be done here. So it's only can go up so far. Because the powers are there. So that's more of an observation around, like, how are we talking more about the parties in all of these conversations as a critical component of being gatekeepers, even at the super local level.
That's a big question.
I know it's a big question, but I love that your data shows that, right? People don't want these
Yeah.
parties. They want independent candidates.
Yeah.
And also they're not going away. And there has to be something in the middle. Like, are we helping for inter-party communication and collaboration and all the things
Yeah.
that happen at the local level and not the national level?
No, yes. I think that that sort of where the direction you're taking it is exactly the direction that I would take it. I would also suggest that emphasizing representation and how views are represented, right? Like talking about, like, I live in Baltimore, Maryland. Um, and thinking about who is in office and connecting their voting, their views, the platform that they are running on to the actual views of Baltimore and Maryland, I think sometimes gets lost in translation, right? Of when we think about sort of serving the people, taking a stance where that messaging emphasizes the way that it is representing what they have heard from communities and from constituents is probably a step. Um, I also think that what we are finding is that more than identity, Americans are looking and want to reward outcomes. And so I think that prioritizing decisions, government effectiveness, actually getting things done goes a long way towards smoothing over some of the frustration. And I think we're seeing a lot, right? Like of uh, current elected officials really trying to emphasize the day in, day out work and what is being done in communities in order to bring people together around okay, we can get stuff done, we can move forward. People are really looking for a functional government more than anything else, and parties are a symptom. I think the views of parties are a symptom of what they are perceiving to be general dysfunction. And so I think you can kind of get around some of that by emphasizing sort of what is functioning, what is working, what is getting done.
And just to say, that's part of what we did up here. We did a
Yeah.
lot of outreach to say, hey, this is what the local governments are achieving. This is why they matter in your life, right? It wasn't about the party, it was about why government matters. So
Yep.
that resonates a lot. Thank you.
Yeah, I also think, we have a tendency to over-index on partisan differences.
Mhm.
And I think that it's worth really holding that everyone is saying they want politicians who think a little bit more independently. Everyone's saying they want voters to have more choice. Large majorities think politics need reform. All of those are coalition building messages.
Right.
And so I do think there's an opportunity, even within a two-party system, to start to think about how to recruit and to build broader coalitions around the things that we know majorities want. Cynthia came off mute like she wants to say something.
No, I'm excited for this particular conversation because I think it offers some opportunities for strategy going forward that I suspect people want their own party to be more responsive to the people who are
Correct.
members of it. And that will happen when more people who care about voters, more people who care about women, et cetera, are part of that infrastructure and on the Rules and Bylaws Committee of the DNC, for example, or of the local party. And that's a very accessible, I think we don't tend to offer that as an opportunity for the first place women and others can get involved is running for your local party office, whatever that is, and then graduating up to the county and the state level. And because those offices are often not very visible, it's fairly easy to get a foothold there, get some other people to have a foothold, and all of a sudden there's a majority on the Maryland Central Committee, for example,
Mhm.
that is pro-voter, pro-woman, pro, et cetera, pro-democracy. And we're not holding the power that the parties have accountable to us because we're not part of those conversations. And right now, some of us, well, Nejla, you've demonstrated doing that from within, but I think a lot of people remain outside of that party infrastructure. And my sense, if I'm interpreting the results correctly, Sarah, is that it's not that nobody wants to be affiliated with the Democratic or the Republican Party. They want those parties to be more responsive to
Yes.
the communities. And we can
Yes.
we can only make that happen if we change the leadership on those who are making those decisions. And quite it's not surprising. People who have power seem to want to hold on to it. And so therefore we need to the way to transform that is to have other people making those rules who are accountable to a broader portion of the electorate. And I know we're a little over time, and I want to be respectful of your time, Sarah, but and I also know I think we have a survey that we're sending out. Is that true, Alyssa, Alana,
Yes,
somebody?
it should go live as soon as you leave the call.
Oh,
You'll
I
get a
see, I
little
see.
pop-up in your browser because it's directly from Zoom.
Got you. Perfect. Oh, lovely. Great. Any other, I think maybe Vicky or Diane had a comment, anything you wanted to articulate? Was that Vicky? It was Vicky.
Yeah, both Vicky and Diane. But and I would love to hear your thoughts on Diane's question, which was when you step back from all of these important insights, what is your sense of what matters most as it relates to the work of Represent Women? In other words, how can Represent Women best leverage and message our data?
Sorry, Alyssa, were you directing that at me or at Cynthia?
I was directing that at Cynthia.
Perfect.
Oh, I was hoping
just
you
in
were
case you need to
directing
leave
it,
the room.
Sarah.
I love it.
I would say it's a strong endorsement that representation matters, that the type of representation we have is going to impact policy outcomes, and those policy outcomes are substantive. It's not just feeling good, it's that voters understand inherently that if somebody's had the lived experience of having to have a couple jobs and do these things and balance motherhood and parenthood, et cetera, has a different lived experience than some others. And so that seems significant to me. The fact that voters want more power within the voting system, I mean, within the party structure that we have now suggests we need voting systems like ranked choice voting and ranked choice voting for single and multi-winner districts that give voters the power to select different kinds of candidates at different levels of government. I think it is fascinating to me that voters identify um, election rules and systems as being so important. That's really heartening. I mean, we couldn't possibly take credit for that, but it is rather convenient that that's what we've been saying for the last 8 years. So whatever that nice relationship is, that what we're saying is what voters are saying makes me feel like we're on the right track, I guess. So that feels encouraging. And I do feel the fact that we've got, United America and Sightline and Ryan and, all the orgs that League of Women Voters who are represented on this call also suggests that there's a wide audience of people who really want to figure out how we can be packaging the work that we're doing so that it's the most it resonates, it's meaningful, and it feels like something that American voters will join us in doing. Because I think that's the thing. We want to be pushing for reforms that fit communities and that answer the needs that voters are feeling in their communities. Not to be too lofty, but let's go. I mean, let's use this.
No, absolutely. And one more thing I will add as well is we will be, as soon as the report is released later today, we're going to have a full page on our website that really, that will provide a lot of what was shared in this presentation and a little bit more of Represent Women's kind of specific take and how we're interpreting these results as it relates to our work. So kind of to answer that other side of your question, we'll kind of have more of that in a follow-up, which I'll follow up later today with an email and with this recording as well.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Sarah and Alyssa and Alana and everybody on the Represent Women team and Nejla and Julie Lucky from Alaska and all the people. And I'm happy to stay on. I know Sarah has to jump for a call, but I'm happy to stay on for a few minutes if anybody has suggestions or wants to chat. But as you know, we have lots of ways to get involved. You can subscribe to the weekend reading. You can join the Women's Power Collaborative. You can check out our Women Experts in Democracy directory. Definitely check out our latest gender parity index, which somebody on our team is going to be dropping in right now, which is a nice companion piece that is a great way to evaluate how well your state is doing and your community is doing in terms of representation for women at the local, state, and federal level. And then I'll also just give a shout out to our international research, which I think is relevant at this time because it also nests our work, our country, the United States, in the broader global perspective, where there are a lot of lessons that we can learn from what is working to give voters more power, to build women's political power in countries around the world, where just not to bury the lead, but it's the different systems and rules that are really having the greatest impact on opportunities to build women's power around the globe.
Thank you all so much for being here today and spending time and staying late with us. We so appreciate all your thoughtfulness in the chat and in your questions. And we'll be following up, like I said, with an email with the recording, with these slides, and with all these great links to get involved. And we'll keep the Zoom open for a few more minutes. But just wanted to say a sincere thank you all for being here.